You sit at your desk, confronting an objective that demands deep, analytical execution and sustained cognitive immersion. Within minutes, an invisible heavy fog sweeps across your consciousness. Your eyes drift from the screen, your thoughts fracture into disconnected loops, and the simple act of reading a single sentence requires a monumental, exhausting act of will. Pop psychology diagnoses this as a moral failing, a lack of discipline, or an addiction to modern digital distraction. It demands that you download productivity applications, block your social media feeds, and force your mind into artificial compliance through raw willpower. These superficial interventions fail because your focus is not broken. Your brain is executing a highly sophisticated, automated emergency shutdown protocol. It has calculated that your cognitive processing centers are approaching complete metabolic exhaustion. To protect its delicate cellular hardware from catastrophic energy depletion, your prefrontal cortex is systematically pulling the plug on your frontoparietal attention networks, forcing an intentional biological decline in your capacity to concentrate on external tasks. To understand why your focus fades so violently under modern demands, we must examine the brutal, unforgiving thermodynamics operating inside the human cranium. The brain represents a mere 2% of your total body mass, yet it consumes an unprecedented 20% of your body's total metabolic fuel. Every logical calculation, every sustained moment of concentration, and every act of emotional inhibition burns an immense amount of adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. The prefrontal cortex is the most metabolically expensive organ in your entire biological setup. In our ancestral past, this intense fuel consumption was tightly regulated by evolution, reserved for short, critical bursts of hunting, navigating terrain, or tracking immediate environmental threats. Today, the modern environment demands that you maintain high-level abstract focus for 8 to 10 hours continuously without interruption. Your biological hardware was never evolved to sustain this level of energetic output. Your brain is running on a Pleistocene engine, attempting to navigate a digital matrix that burns through its delicate chemical reserves at an unsustainable compounding rate. The physical infrastructure of human concentration is governed by an intricate neural highway known to clinical neuroscience as the frontoparietal attention network. This complex circuit connects your prefrontal cortex directly to the parietal lobe, acting as a highly focused biological lens that filters out environmental noise and stabilizes your awareness onto a single objective. Under normal physiological conditions, this network fires with high-amplitude synchronization, allowing you to enter deep, uninterrupted states of cognitive immersion and flow. However, when you bombard this network with chronic modern overstimulation, switching between browser tabs, responding to instant messages, and consuming short-form media, the synchronization breaks down entirely. The constant task switching fractures the electrical continuity of the circuit, forcing the network to enter a state of severe functional desynchronization. This means that the biological lens of your attention becomes warped and blurred, leaving you physically incapable of holding a single thread of complex thought. As your frontoparietal network burns through its metabolic fuel to keep you focused, it generates a highly specific, toxic chemical byproduct known as adenosine. Adenosine is a potent neuromodulator that acts as your brain's internal fatigue gauge. Every single minute you force your prefrontal cortex to execute high cognitive load work, a steady stream of adenosine accumulates in the synaptic clefts between your neurons. When adenosine binds to its target receptors, it slows down the firing rate of your central nervous system, systematically dampening the electrical transmission of thought across your entire cerebrum. In a healthy ancestral routine, this chemical waste is cleared out during deep, slow-wave sleep. But when you push your mind through hours of uninterrupted digital stimulation without deep rest, the concentration of adenosine reaches a critical threshold. Your brain tissue is literally choked with metabolic waste, forcing an intense biological pressure that dulls your intellect and makes deep focus physically impossible. When the accumulation of adenosine reaches its biological limit, the brain faces a critical homeostatic crisis that it cannot ignore. If it allows you to continue pushing your focus, the cellular architecture of your prefrontal cortex risks permanent damage and severe energy depletion. To prevent this, your survival networks initiate a protective process known as receptor downregulation. The postsynaptic membranes inside your executive centers begin to pull back their receptors for excitatory neurotransmitters like glutamate, lowering your neural baseline. Think of it as a circuit breaker flipping inside your skull to prevent an electrical fire. Because the internal environment is overheating from overwork, the brain artificially turns down the voltage. As a direct consequence of this downregulation, your executive control drops to zero. You look at the task you desperately need to complete, but your brain can no longer generate the electrical power required to bridge the gap between your intent and your voluntary execution. Recent functional neuroimaging studies have exposed an even more sinister reason why your focus shuts down during long periods of mental work. When your prefrontal cortex is forced to maintain concentration, it relies heavily on the neurotransmitter glutamate to send signals between brain cells. However, prolonged high-intensity focus causes glutamate to pool in the lateral prefrontal cortex faster than your brain's recycling networks can clear it away. High concentrations of unregulated glutamate are highly dangerous, altering the delicate chemical balance of your brain and threatening cellular health through excitotoxicity. To prevent this toxic buildup, the brain triggers an automated safety protocol. It initiates a profound, involuntary sense of aversion toward the task you are performing. You experience this as a sudden, intense feeling of mental exhaustion and a desperate urge to look away. Your brain is deliberately making the work feel painful, using emotional distress to force you to stop burning glutamate. The moment your prefrontal cortex suppresses its attention networks to protect its chemical balance, a massive systemic shift in neural blood flow occurs inside the cranium. The task-positive network shuts down, and a giant background web of brain regions instantly fires up, the default mode network, or the DMN. The DMN is the anatomical home of your internal critic, your ego, and your self-referential thought loops. In a state of cognitive fatigue, this network undergoes a pathological rebound effect, firing at maximum capacity. Deprived of the anchoring effect of goal-directed work, your mind turns completely inward, unleashing a flood of intrusive thoughts, past failures, and unprovoked anxieties. This is why, when you are mentally burned out, you do not find peaceful rest. Instead, your mind enters a chaotic internal storm of self-attack, turning quiet moments of recovery into active mental torment, because your attention switchboard has lost the energy to shut the DMN down. To break the agonizing tension of a hyperactive default mode network and an exhausted prefrontal cortex, your brain seeks the fastest possible route to neurochemical relief. That route is digital escapism. You open your phone, click on a social media feed, or scroll through short-form video content. The sudden high-amplitude novelty triggers a quick artificial release of dopamine into your nucleus accumbens. You mistake this microdose of stimulation for actual recovery, feeling a temporary drop in your mental fatigue. But this is a devastating biological illusion that traps your mind. Consuming hyper-stimulating digital content does not clear adenosine or clear glutamate from your prefrontal cortex. It demands intense, high-speed visual and auditory processing, forcing your brain cells to burn through their remaining metabolic reserves. You are not resting your hardware. You are pouring petrol onto a burning engine, accelerating the decay of your focus. This dangerous loop of chasing high-amplitude digital novelty to escape mental fatigue causes a profound collapse of your internal reward matrix. Your brain operates on a strict principle of homeostasis, constantly balancing its chemical sensitivity. When you bombard your desensitized prefrontal cortex with artificial digital spikes while it is already struggling with metabolic waste, you force a severe downregulation of your dopamine receptors. The biological volume control of your motivational drive is turned down to its lowest level. The consequence of this adaptation is that ordinary, meaningful human pursuits, such as reading a book, learning a skill, or working toward a distant career objective, no longer release enough dopamine to clear the newly elevated threshold of your desensitized receptors. Your capacity to care about your future is systematically erased, leaving your mind completely flat and trapped in behavioral stagnation. When your attention networks are desynchronized, your prefrontal cortex is chemically downregulated, and your dopamine baseline is flattened, you enter the threshold of chronic brain fog. This state is not a temporary feeling of tiredness. It is a structural realignment of your central nervous system. Your brain has adapted to your environment by locking itself into a low-voltage defensive operating state to conserve fuel. The white matter tracts connecting your executive networks lose their transmission efficiency, making your thoughts feel sluggish, disorganized, and completely fragmented. You wake up every morning in a state of profound neurobiological exhaustion, your brain cells literally choked with cellular waste from poor sleep and digital overstimulation. Your mind has become a hostile landscape for your own goals, optimizing its pathways to ensure your absolute failure the moment you attempt to concentrate. When you reach this state of chronic brain fog, your cognitive architecture enters a state of total gridlock. The high concentration of adenosine in the synaptic clefts refuses to clear because your sleep cycles are fragmented by evening cortisol spikes. Concurrently, your down-regulated dopamine receptors ensure that you cannot generate the anticipatory drive required to execute deep work. You are caught in a perfect biological catch-22. You need focus to fix your life, but the act of attempting to focus causes your brain to release toxic levels of glutamate, triggering immediate avoidance. Pop psychology looks at this profound immobility and prescribes mindset shifts or inspirational quotes, completely failing to understand that your hardware is physically locked. You cannot think your way out of a compromised metabolic matrix. Forcing a desensitized, waste-choked brain to work harder only deepens the functional atrophy, ensuring that your next mental collapse will be even more severe. Reclaiming your cognitive hardware requires the systematic, uncompromising enforcement of physiological boundaries. To clear adenosine and restore your prefrontal cortex, you must willingly enter a period of deliberate sensory deprivation, stripping away high-amplitude artificial stimulation to allow your cellular membranes to slowly restore their natural receptor density. To silence the hyperactive default mode network, you must forcefully anchor your brain with high cognitive load, low stimulation tasks that physically pull blood flow away from the regions of self-evaluation. This process is inherently uncomfortable. It is a literal detoxification of your nervous system. Your ancient survival networks will resist, manufacturing brilliant rationalizations to retreat to comfort. But understanding this science changes your relationship with the pain. You no longer view the friction as a sign that you are broken. You view it as the raw data of biology rewriting itself.